This episode is brought to you by my fertility awareness programs. Master fertility awareness and improve your menstrual cycle health at the same time. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme for more information. That's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 181. Welcome to the 181st episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. For those of you who are relatively new to charting your cycles with fertility awareness, and also for those of you who've been charting for a while and have some experience under your belt, I have something special for you. I've created a free video series, and I've called it Fertility Awareness 101. Now, in this video series, what I'm going through with you is what is fertility awareness, what is body literacy, something that I always talk about because it's not just about charting, it's also about what you can learn about your body and your health from your charts. I go through the 3 main fertile signs and also how to get started with charting. What do you need to make it work? And what are the best resources to help you on your journey as you get started? So for more information, head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 to get your free copy. Thank you for joining me today. I am excited to share today's episode with you. Today I decided to create a special solo episode with you. I wanted to talk to you about staying consistent with charting. And that is something that I was thinking about a lot over the holidays, especially because my routine was thrown off, as I talk a little bit more about later in the episode. And so I wanted to just share with you some of the thoughts that I had. Over the holidays, I was paying close attention to my own habits to see how I'm able to stay consistent. Because over the years, regardless of what's going on, where I am, if I'm traveling, or if I've got guests visiting, whatever the case is, I've always managed to stay fairly consistent with my charting. And so I just wanted to share some insights for how that all works and how I've been able to do that. And I thought that would be a helpful episode just because we are coming off of the holidays. And I find that's one of the challenges for a lot of the women that I work with one-on-one, or a lot of the women that I work with in the group program, where it's all well and good when everything's going according to plan. So even the difference between, say, during the week and the weekend. So during the week, you've got a lot of us have set schedules. So, you're waking up around the same time every day. And then even the weekend can throw us off because all of a sudden the weekend we have a different schedule, let alone if you're in a different country or if you're traveling. And so some of the ideas that I've learned, the ideas that I've had, and also some of the ideas that I've learned from my clients and the different women that I work with, I wanted to share some of that with you because that's a big part of it. Since you can't only, if you're going to rely on fertility awareness, for instance, as a method of birth control, or using the method in order to optimize your chances of trying to conceive, you can't only use it when everything's going great. Life is always full of surprises. So you have to also figure out how to use it when life isn't predictable and when things happen. So that's what we're talking about today. I know that I have listeners of the show at all different stages of their fertility awareness journey. So I know that some of you are at the very beginning of your journey, where I get emails regularly from listeners who've recently discovered the podcast, recently discovered fertility awareness. This is all new to them. And so you may be listening and this is all new to you. You've just recently discovered fertility awareness and you're figuring out how to chart, getting all the supplies you need. I guess the only supplies you need are basal body temperature and a charting app, but getting it all together and really starting to jump in and do the charting piece of it. And I know that a lot of you have been listening for a while, and some of you have years of charting under your belt. So wherever you fall on that spectrum, if you are looking for additional support, I know especially when you're first starting out, it's really getting the basics down. So in order to feel really comfortable and confident with charting, it really comes down to the basics: cervical mucus, basal body temperature, and cervical position. That's the first stage. So really getting confident about what you're seeing and being very clear on what to write down, how to chart properly, how to interpret your cervical mucus, how to get a right temperature, what to do when all of that goes all over the place. The first part. And then the second part is interpretation. So the second part is, now that you're comfortable and confident with putting everything on the page, what does it mean? And if your cycle parameters are off, what can you do about it? So with fertility awareness charting, it's always a two-stage process. It's never just about the charting. I have yet to work with a woman who was only interested in the charting aspect. All of my clients are also wanting to know what it all means. And if they're seeing something that they're concerned about, they want to know what they can do about it. And so for more information about the different programs that I offer, if you're looking for additional support with charting, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. And if you're not sure which program would be the best fit for you, make sure to set up a complimentary 15-minute consultation with me, and we can actually go through the different options and see which one would be the best fit. So that's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. Now let's jump into today's episode. So let's jump into today's episode. Today, I wanted to tackle the subject of how to stay consistent with charting when everything in your life is going haywire or when your schedule is thrown up in the air. How to manage fertility awareness when things are not going as planned or when things are not scheduled. Like anything else with fertility awareness, it's really easy to chart your cycles when you're on a good routine and everything is going well, all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. But it's often a little bit harder or significantly harder when that schedule is thrown off and you're kind of thrown out of your regular routine. So at the time that I'm recording this, February of 2018, and so that means that I just finished and we all just came off of the holiday season. And so for me, the holiday season I was completely thrown off my usual schedule. So for me, with my family, in the holiday season, the kids were at home, my parents were visiting, and so we had visitors in the house. And whereas I usually have set times in the week where I'm able to work, it was completely thrown off. And just different times of going to bed, different times of waking up, different things going on. That is just within my house, within my time zone. So I know a lot of you over the holidays were traveling to different time zones, different places, visiting with family, eating different foods, doing different things, experiencing different fun things and different stressful things. And so I thought that this would be a really good time to talk about how to actually stay focused and continue charting even when everything is going haywire around you and even when you're being thrown off of your schedule. So during this time, I was thinking about this. So I was paying close attention to some of the things that I did and really trying to think about how I'm able to continue charting even when things are outside of my normal routine. And so that's what I wanted to share with you. And so the very first aspect of this is establishing a really firm habit of checking and charting your fertile signs on a daily basis. And so this isn't something that you can actually establish in the middle of a stressful situation or in the middle of the schedule going haywire. This is actually something that you have to work on a day-to-day basis so that when you have the stressful event or when you have the travel plans, the habits are already firmly in place. And so I know a lot of you are new to charting, and I know a lot of the listeners have found the podcast for one reason or another. I connect with so many women who have recently come off of hormonal birth control or they're thinking about coming off. And really in those first several months of charting, whether you have one chart under your belt or two, whether you've just freshly started charting, and I know a lot of you listening also have a lot of experience charting. So I know I have a lot of experienced charters listening to the show who've charted their cycles for several months, years even. And so regardless of where you fall, the key to keeping your routine and staying consistent with charting when things fall out of the wayside is to really have that habit established. So whether you're new to charting or whether you're an experienced charter, what that means for you is to find a way to incorporate your observations and your recording of your observations into your day-to-day schedule. So finding a way to really make it routine. And so one of the things that I suggest to my clients, so we can break it down into, your mucus, your basal body temperature, and your cervical position. But one of the suggestions that I make to my clients is to find something that you're already doing and tack this habit onto it. So when it comes to habits, there's so much research that's been done about habits and how they work and how they form and how long we have to do an activity in order for it to start being a habit. The thing about habits is once they've formed, we don't have to think about them. It's just part of the routine. And so one of the easiest ways to create a new habit is to actually stack it onto another habit. There's a book called Habit Stacking, and that concept of tacking on a habit to an existing habit is a good one because, if you're already doing something, then it's easier. So we can apply this to cervical mucus checking, for example. So I know that when all of you out there go to the bathroom, for example, you're already wiping yourselves. So this is nothing new. Wiping when you go to the bathroom is not a novel concept. And so in terms of getting yourself into the habit of checking for cervical mucus, for example, if you can tack on the habit of actually taking that opportunity when you're wiping anyways to check for mucus and do that at the same time, then it's easier. And although it might seem a little bit awkward at first, and although you might have a hard time remembering at first, once you start to do that, because it's something that you're doing already and you're simply adding this onto an existing habit, that can be one of the ways just to help you to get into the habit in general. And if you're able to stick with it for at least one full cycle would be my suggestion to do it consistently, kind of force yourself, find a way to trick yourself into doing it for one full cycle. So your average cycles fall somewhere around 29, 30 days. So if you're able to do it for that long and then continue on, then eventually it'll actually just feel like routine. So I know for me, I've been training my cycle for decade and a half for 16 years. I think this year marks 16 years. And so I can't really go to the bathroom without checking for mucus because I've been doing it for so many years that I don't really think about it. It's just something that I do now. Whereas when I first started doing it, it was hard for me to remember and I'd often forget and all of that. But that was so long ago. That's the mucus part. And so the basal body temperature, similar idea, like try to think about how you could actually make that part of your day-to-day routine. And so I often will ask, especially when I'm doing my group programs, I'll often ask the ladies in the group to share some of their ideas for how they remind themselves. And so when it comes to remembering to take your temperature, it's kind of the same idea of trying to trick yourself into remembering, trying to think about a habit that you already have and stack this on top of it. And so that could be literal, stacking it on top, because for many of you, I'm sure, the first thing that many of us do when we get up in the morning is check our phones. So whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, I'm not going to talk about that right now. But in the general sense, a lot of us, that's the first thing we do. So whether that's because your phone is your alarm clock or whether it's because you just are dying to check social media to see if anyone's commented on something. So literally putting your thermometer on top of your phone can be one of the ways that you can help yourself remember and get into the habit of checking your temperature the first thing in the morning, every morning when you wake up. And so if you can trick yourself long enough, so if you can trick yourself for one full cycle, then at that point it starts to become more of a habit. And eventually you get to the point where it feels more strange if you don't do it than if you do it. And so I know for me, an example of that comes to mind right away is flossing. So I remember like the time before I flossed. So in my very, very early 20s, I didn't actually floss every day. I dated this guy and he flossed every day. And so then I started flossing every day. And so literally since that point, I floss every day. And if I don't floss, like I don't not floss. So even if I forget, even if I don't floss at night, I wake up and floss because it feels too weird for me not to floss. So same idea. If you can trick yourself long enough, find a way to just tack this onto another habit and do it for long enough, at least one full cycle, then it'll start to feel normal. And you might even get to the point where it feels weird if you don't do it. Okay, so we've talked about mucus, checking for mucus and trying to tack that on to the wiping you already do when you go to the bathroom. And we've talked a little bit about basal body temperature and kind of tacking that to a habit that you do first thing in the morning. So if it's not your phone, You could think of something else that you do or something that you like. What is the first thing that you do in the morning? Or could you put the thermometer beside your nightstand? Or what could you do so that there's a trigger, so that when you get up, there's some sort of trigger that reminds you to take your temperature? And cervical position. So my suggestion for cervical position, it always kind of goes along with the habit. So trying to get yourself to actually check it and remember to check it. Think about a time of day that would be convenient for you to do it. So kind of plan ahead. Think about, it's not that you have to check your cervix the same time every day, but if you can think about a time of day that would be convenient for you, then that's helpful, because again, we're just trying to get into the habit. So for me, if I'm going to choose a time of day to check my cervix, it's going to be when I'm in the shower, because I'm already naked and clean. My hands are clean and I am already naked, so it's very convenient for me. So if I was to choose a time of day to check my cervix, it would be when I'm in the shower. And just having some sort of trigger. For you, it might not be when you're in the shower. Maybe it's first thing in the morning when you're brushing your teeth, and maybe just being in the bathroom, brushing your teeth can be the trigger, because you're already brushing your teeth every morning and you're just adding a cervical position check to your morning routine. So think about things like that. I think that's kind of the first step. So when you're so my suggestion in terms of how to stay consistent with charting, it starts today. So it starts with the habits that we're developing today. And it starts with learning to be consistent with charting in the first place. So that is kind of the first step. And the benefit of getting into that habit of really checking every day, and to the point that it just becomes second nature, is that when you are thrown off your routine, it's not that hard for you to kind of fall back into the habit. So even if you're traveling, you can still remember to put your thermometer on top of your cell phone before you go to bed. Or even if you are out, you're not in your house, if you've gotten to the habit of checking for mucus when you go to the bathroom, then that's something that you're going to do anyways. And so over the holidays, as I mentioned, when my routine and my schedule was thrown off, I really consciously paid attention to how I continued charting throughout, because I wanted to share some of those tips with you. And that's what I noticed. Because regardless of how crazy it is or where I am or what's going on, I'm still going to the bathroom several times a day. And so I'm still checking for mucus, regardless of what's going on, because that's a firmly established habit. So it's not something I had to think about. It's not something I really had to try to do, but it's just something that, because the habit is already there, I was doing. And so that's the first point, just getting the habit settled in. The second point, which I think comes more to how to interpret. So one of the specific challenges about charting when your life is a bit different, when you're traveling, when there's stressful situations going on, if you're not in your own house or anything like that, one of the challenges is that you'll notice that your charts are often a little bit different. It's a joke, but it's actually like a real thing. So but I always joke that if you're on a plane at some point, your chart is gonna look a little bit different. Whether your temperatures are going to be off or your mucus patterns are going to look a little bit different, potentially your ovulation being delayed or something like that. Regardless of what happens, if you're on a plane, if you're traveling, if you switch time zones, you're going to see some changes on your chart. And so that presents a different challenge, because it's not really challenging in the sense of I'm having a hard time remembering my observations, but it can make it challenging for you to interpret what you're actually seeing in your chart. And so one of the tricks and tips, so number 2, in terms of how to stay consistent with charting when everything's kind of going all over the place, is to be able to rely on different signs at different times. So for instance, if you get sick and you have a fever for several days, all of a sudden your temperature is not helping you. It's not very helpful, because you can't really rely on it. Similarly, if you're dealing with a lot of stress, or you have several nights of really rough sleep, or if you're traveling, again, if you're on a plane and you're in a different time zone, what you usually notice is that your temperatures will be a little bit off for a couple days. And so what's really helpful is to actually be able to rely on your cervical mucus observations when your temperature is not helpful. And so that's a bit of a skill that comes with a little bit of time and practice. So not only being able to get used to the observational part of it, figuring out how to check, and then figuring out how to write it down and to know what you're seeing and all of that, but also to the point that you're so comfortable with your cervical mucus observations that you can actually rely on those to indicate what's going on if ever your temperature is out of whack. And so that's the second part of it, because that's something that I was paying attention to over the holidays, especially if you're not in your house, if you've got company, if you've got strange travel schedules and it's harder to take your temperature, or you take your temperature, but you know that you can't rely on it because the temperature is totally out of whack. That's when it becomes really important to be able to fall back on your cervical mucus observations and also your cervical position. So that's the second tip. And then the third is actually to establish the habit of recording your fertile signs before you go to sleep at night. So with fertility awareness charting, there's two very important aspects of the whole charting part. So one is remembering to make your observations and getting in the habit of doing that. But the other is actually writing it down. And so it's really no help to you to do all of your observations if they don't get written down somewhere. So a great example of it is think back to what you had for dinner last Thursday. And I don't mean like if you're listening to this on the Friday it comes out, I don't mean the Thursday yesterday. I mean like last Thursday, so a week ago. So if anybody listening can even think about what you were eating last Thursday, it would probably take a great deal of mental gymnastics. Like you'd probably have to really think about it and like try to remember what was going on that day, and maybe there was a special meal that you had and that's why you can remember, or maybe you have like a regular like on Thursdays is this night or whatever. But other than those types of situations, you probably can't remember what you had for dinner last Thursday. But on the flip side, if you actually had something written down, like if you keep track of your meals or keep track of them in an app or something like that, then you would just be able to look at the app and be like, oh yeah, I had this on Thursday. And it's the same idea with charting. So you think in the moment, oh yeah, I'll totally remember that I had mucus today or whatever the case. But 3 or 4 days goes by and you just will not actually remember what you had on what day. And so a really important part of, again, kind of establishing these habits is to figure out and find a way to establish the habit firmly of actually writing or noting on your charting app, but recording what you see at the end of the day so that you're actually recording it in real time instead of trying to remember what you saw several days later. And so once you're in the habit of doing that, even if you can kind of create some sort of bedtime routine or tack this onto your nighttime routine. So if every night you brush your teeth and you take a bath or something, and then you brush your teeth and then you put on your pajamas or whatever you do, you read a book, but whatever you do, if you are able to tack this on as kind of like the last step that you do before you go to bed or somewhere in there's a time when you're able to do it, then that is another way of helping you to stay consistent. Because once you have that habit in place and you get in the habit of doing it before you go to bed, then you don't really have to think about it that much. And it can be part of the last thing you do. You note what you saw that day in your phone, and then you put your phone wherever you put it, and then you put your thermometer on top. And so kind of thinking about how can I make this into a routine such that even if I'm in a hotel, even if I'm away from my home or whatever's going on, I still have this habit in place. I suppose that this is largely about building the habit. As I think, as I'm kind of reflecting back on what I've shared with you, it all comes down to creating that and finding ways to tack this on to other things that you're already doing. But I hope that this episode has made you think about just different ways to make this more consistent. One thing, especially if you're a new charter, when I'm talking about doing all this stuff and adding one habit to the next and all of that, it can make it seem like it's really cumbersome and like this takes a lot of time and that you really have to be committed, because it makes it seem like it's this kind of this ordeal. And so although when you talk about it and when we're discussing how this works and how to do it, it can seem like it's something that would take a lot of time. If you actually add up the amount of time it takes to check your fertile signs throughout the day and record at the end of the night, it adds up to less than 2 minutes a day, really. The temperature taking, because of course, I suggest that you leave the thermometer in your mouth for at least 10 minutes when you're taking your temperature to get an accurate reading. So that is 10 minutes. So in all fairness, that part takes a little bit longer. But in terms of actually doing your observations throughout the day and recording at the end of the night, that is just minutes. And so from someone who's been doing it for so many years, if you can brush your teeth twice a day, you can do this because it requires about the same amount of time and commitment. It's just something that doesn't take very much time. So I don't want you to get the impression that it's something that takes a ton of time or requires a ton of commitment. Really what it is finding a way to stay consistent. And so just a couple of thoughts that I had about how to do that is, I think one of the challenging things, especially if you're new to the method and you don't really have anyone in your life who is also doing this, if you are kind of the lone ranger and you're doing this on your own and you don't really have a lot of support, or even if people in your life are kind of think that you're a little bit strange for not wanting to go on hormonal birth control and don't really understand your desire to move away from that, one of the things that can really be helpful is to find a buddy. So to find somebody who is also charting their cycles and or join a group. There's lots of groups on Facebook. Of course, there's the Fertility Friday Facebook community, fertilityfriday.com/community if you want to join us in there. But really finding your people, finding other women who are also charting, finding a space where you can talk about charting and not feel weird about it, where you can ask all of your questions and find somebody who's doing what you're doing. If you find that you're having a hard time remembering and you actually really want to be more consistent about it, find that accountability, find a charting buddy, someone who you can connect with and talk to, find a community, a group, and then you can even ask, like, how do you stay it? This is my challenge with, like, you can put it in the group. This is my challenge with staying consistent. This is my situation. This is why it's hard for me to do it. Do you have any suggestions for me? Just being able to have those conversations with women who know what you're talking about, who totally get it because they're doing it too, and who can support you, that makes all the difference. And so I know when I host my groups, that's one of the pieces of feedback that I get the most, which is that you're in a group with women who totally get it, who are on the same path as you are, who are really supportive and who share their tips and tricks of how they do it. And all of a sudden you have all of these tools and all of these new ideas for how to stay consistent with it. And also if you're able to join some sort of community and be around women who are doing this as well, you also have the accountability. And you also see that, hey, there's a lot of women who are doing this. You know, there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of women who chart their cycles and who do it successfully. There's multiple thousands of women who actually use fertility awareness as their primary birth control, and they do it successfully. So if you are in a situation where you don't know that many people who do it, or you don't know anyone who does it, and it seems kind of strange, you just learned about this and it seems super fringe, like who's doing this? I'm the only one I know who's doing this, or whatever the case. Yes, finding other women who are doing it, it makes it more normal. It makes it more tangible. And as soon as you see that other women are doing it, it makes it just seem a lot more possible for you to do it. So like I mentioned, you can join us in the Fertility Friday community. I'm going to post a thread in there just to see what suggestions that you have as the community. What suggestions do you have to help stay consistent when things are crazy? What did you do during the holidays to stay consistent with charting? Or did you fall off the wagon? And what did you do? And that actually leads me to the last point that I want to address in this episode, which is what happens when you can't? Like, what happens when something really throws you off and something serious happens with your family members, or you're like legitimately on some vacation somewhere and you don't have internet connection and it just doesn't work. Like, you just cannot chart. What do you do? And I think that's a really, really important question. It's really helpful to know the answer. So when you're using fertility awareness for birth control, or if you're trying to conceive and you're really not able to Well, let's talk first about birth control. So if you're using fertility awareness for birth control and you're really not able to track your signs, you're not able to do your observations, something happens and you totally are just like that week or that day or that however long, you're just not able to chart. So from the birth control perspective, you have to know that when you don't chart when you're not doing your observations, or if you do your observations but you don't write them down for several days, you just have to consider yourself fertile. That's what you have to do. So if you're using the method for birth control, if ever you have, and we all do, everyone has a couple of days where they miss an observation or they're not able to write things down. It happens to everybody. And so when that happens, the key is to know what to do about it. And so what you need to do is consider yourself fertile. And then because you didn't check and you don't know what's going on, you have to consider yourself fertile, and also the 3 days after that, just to be on the safe side. And so having a plan in place for how to manage your fertile window and how to manage sex on your fertile days is really important. So having an open communication with your partner, if you're in a relationship, and knowing what you're going to do, how you're going to manage those potentially fertile days, if you're going to use a barrier method or if you're going to use alternative sex, meaning no penis and vagina intercourse or whatever you're going to do, just having that in your mind so that you know how to manage when you're in that type of a situation. So that's the first part. And then the second part of it is not to beat yourself up about it. Everybody has times when you kind of fall off the wagon and the charting kind of goes to the wayside for a bit. And so the key is to really not dwell on that. Just you're a human being. That is evidence of it. So if you ever needed evidence that you are a human being, missing a couple days of charting, there's your proof. And so you don't give yourself a hard time about it. My suggestion is just to get back on. So once you realize, oh man, I really was thrown off by this thing that happened. I haven't charted for a couple of days. I'm just going to go to the bathroom and check my mucus now. So just get back into the habit of it. Just kind of brush it off. And that's how you build the habit. You just build the habit when you catch yourself. You realize, oh my goodness, I forgot to do this. You just jump back on and start doing it. So just to kind of summarize what we've spoken about today. So basically, the purpose of this episode is to give you some encouragement and some ideas for how to really get into the habit of charting and regardless of what happens to keep going and to stay consistent with it. So what are some of the tips that I've learned over the years that have helped me to stay consistent regardless of what's going on in my life, regardless of where I am in the world, what I have done to help me stay consistent, and also what I've learned from working with clients. So what are some of the tips and tricks that they've used? And so the first and most important aspect, of course, is to establish the habit. So you want to get into the habit. And then once you're in the habit, it becomes easier, regardless of what's going on in your life. If you're already in the habit, then you don't really have to try. It's just something that you'll do automatically. The second thing is to learn how to rely on your mucus when your temperatures are questionable. So to know that sometimes when you're in stressful situations or when you're thrown off your schedule, your chart might look a little bit off. Your cervical patterns might be a little bit different. You might experience a delay in ovulation, and you might experience temperatures that are abnormally high or low or whatever the case. And so really recognizing that there's 3 fertile signs we're watching. We're watching cervical position. That's an optional sign. So not everybody watches cervical position, but you might be watching your cervical position and your cervical mucus and your temperature. And so knowing how to rely a little bit more heavily on your cervical mucus if your temperatures are off. So knowing how to really look at one sign versus the other, knowing how to rely more heavily on your cervical mucus if your temperatures are off, knowing that to rely more heavily on your temperature if you don't understand your cervical mucus observations, knowing how to fall back and take a look at your cervix as the other kind of the tertiary sign to connect the dots. But just really having a good understanding, that's very, very helpful as well. The third part is establishing the habit of recording your fertile signs before you go to sleep at night. So this is really important because it doesn't really matter if you observe and you check your fertile signs if you're not writing it down. It's a 2-step process. So in order for this method to work, you can't just observe. You have to observe and write. or note or record or in your device or however you do it. So if you're using an app or paper charting or whatever the case, observing by itself is not enough. You always have to mark it down, because ultimately you won't remember what you saw. No matter how good of a memory you have, you won't be able to remember several days of what you saw and all of that. So those are the first three things. And then, of course, I added in a bonus fourth, which is that when you do fall off the wagon, which we all do, it's really important just to get back on. And so part of staying consistent is developing that habit. And part of developing a habit is to know that you're not always going to be perfect right off the bat. And it takes time to develop a habit. And so there's no woman who has charted her cycles who has ever been perfect, because perfection is not the goal. The goal is body literacy. And so in order to get there, there's going to be times when you miss an observation. There's going to be times when something happens and it really throws you off, and you might have several days where you're not charting. And so the key is not to beat yourself up about it, just to get back on the horse and start charting. And of course, finding a support system is really, really helpful. So I definitely suggest for you, if you do not have people around you who are charting, for whom charting is very normal, people who you can ask questions to, people who you can share your thoughts with and bounce ideas off of, then definitely you need to find your people. So with that said, I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can find the show notes for this episode at fertilityfriday.com/181. If you haven't yet grabbed a copy of my free video series, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. So that is my 3-part video series that takes you through the basics of fertility awareness charting and also shares some of the best resources that you'll need, especially when you're starting out with charting. For those of you who are either learning to chart your cycles right now and really wanting that extra support to help you get started, and also for those of you who are more experienced charters, so you're at the stage of charting, you're feeling fairly confident, but perhaps the interpretation part is a little bit more difficult, trying to understand what it all means when your charts don't always look like they do in the books. Make sure to check out my Fertility Friday programs. I have a number of different programs, whether you're looking for a one-time session so that we can go through your charts together and do a really detailed combined with a detailed history so that we can really figure out what's happening with your charts, or whether you're actually looking to dive in deeply and to really benefit from some one-on-one time so that I can take you through the program and you can leave feeling extremely confident about your ability to chart and also have a much deeper insight into what's happening in your cycles. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me for more information about my programs. And if you're not sure which program is going to be the best fit for you, make sure to sign up for a complimentary 15-minute consultation with me, and we can really go through the different program options and see which one is going to work best for you. And so with that said, I want to thank you so much for listening to today's show. Make sure to jump into the Fertility Friday Facebook community and share what your experiences have been like with charting so far. So whether you were able to stay consistent with charting over the holidays, if you didn't have any trouble, then I'm sure you have some great suggestions and advice for some of the other ladies who may have had a harder time with it. So I'd love to see you in that discussion there and really figure out just to support each other and share some ideas for how to stay consistent, especially when life is crazy, because as you all know, as we all know, life is not always super predictable. So there's times when things go according to plan, but a lot of the time things happen. And so how do we fit charting into our lives, our very busy, complicated lives? And so hopefully this episode has helped you to do just that. So thank you again for hanging out with me today. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.